So as I mentioned before, we started Fundamental Principles about 6 years ago. And the idea, I was responsible for the funds group that Carl now is managing at BDC. And we said, you know, in our small pond here of Canada, how can we bring more resources to the GP community? You know, how can we put domain experts, how can we put best practices in front of them more regularly so that they can do what they do better, faster? And that's what Fundamental Principles was trying to be. And as we went along with that, we said, what can we do anything more? Can we go deeper? Can we go faster? And a couple of things happened within a short period of time, about 4 years ago, that really started crystallizing our thinking. First, I was invited by my colleague, Ela, to the graduation ceremony of Kaufman Fellows Program in Palo Alto. And I had been familiar with the program some years before when I was down in Boston. And I was invited to speak and invited to attend the graduation exercise itself. And I was reminded of just what a powerful network they've built over 20 plus years, and a powerful global network. So that was kind of in my mind. And then just a few months later, here in Toronto, I went to an event at Ryerson, which was organized by Pankaj Sood and some of his colleagues, PE conference. And there was a guy there, Phil Wickham, who was the CEO of Kaufman Fellows Program. And he spoke, and I was on the panel, and then, you know, that evening there was a speaker's dinner or something, and I said, you know, have you guys ever thought about, you know, doing something kind of like Kaufman Fellows in Canada? And he said, well, yeah, we've talked about it. A lot of countries have approached us about that, but, you know, we never kind of got engagement with any local partner. So that got me thinking. And then I went back inside. Ela was with our healthcare fund inside BDC at the time. And I started talking to her about this idea. Pankaj, who's also a Kaufman Fellow, was in the discussion. And we just were kind of churning this. Is there a way for us to work with Kaufman Fellows Program to create something specific to Canada that will help GPs get better at what they do faster? And so we kind of kicked that idea around. We reached out to several of you, GPs, LPs, across the industry, and tried to get a sense of whether you thought it was a good idea. If so, what would it look like? And we ended up finally, after about 2 years of that, finally striking an agreement with Kaufman Fellows Program for them to consult with us on delivering something that we ended up calling GP Academy. And absolutely key to that whole thing coming together and then us starting to deliver that. So we've now delivered 3 out of 4 modules. 4th one's coming up at the end of November. Was my colleague Ela Bornstein. And because Ela, being a Kaufman Fellow and a GP, really kind of got what we were trying to do in a very personal way. Plus the relationship she had with Kaufman Fellows. Really, I think, you know, made the whole thing come to life. So let me see, it was January of 17. We took applications. We ended up selecting 10 members of the first cohort, and they started meeting in May of 17. And so those 10 individuals have gone through 3 modules. The final and 4th one will be in November, and we're going to share with you some of their experiences. But you know, the person to really hear from is Ela, because I've referred to her as the kind of headmistress of the school. She really has been the key element of making this whole thing come to life. So, Ela Bornstein.
Hi, everyone. So if I give you my mommy look, don't get scared. It just comes out naturally, you know. We actually have a lot of our GP Academy members here today, and maybe we can get them to stand up so you can all know who they are. You know, I think you've got the running list.
I do. Just so I so I'll read all 10, and I think we have 9 here today. So Cubit. Code's in the back. There he is. Dave Unsworth. I think Dave was. There he is. There he is. Mike McCauley from Garage. There we are. Garage Capital, not the Garage. Janet Bannister, many of you know, Real Ventures, standing there just in front of the camera. Craig Strong, around 13. Don't see Craig. Amit Shah, also not here, but he's with Golden. Rob Barbara, Bill Ventures. There he is. He's the Halifax outpost for the venture industry. So, that's right. Yeah. So that's where the LPs need to look. And Angela Tran King Yens. She's with Version 1, not able to get here from, she's based in San Francisco, working with Boris Wirtz in Vancouver. And then last but not least, because you'll see more of him, JF Marcoux with White Star, based in Montreal. So those are the 10 who are, oh, wait, Matt, sorry. Matt Leibowitz. My mistake, I apologize, Matt. I thought I'd scanned before and you weren't here. I apologize. Yes, he's with Plaza Ventures here in Toronto, and Plaza's really got an interesting model already, and they've raised a fund recently that's going to do even more interesting things. So really quite a fascinating group, and I've been privileged to get to know them through this cycle.
So when Neil asked me to talk to him about my experience as a Kauffman Fellow, class 17, so they're on class 24 right now. It was pretty interesting because Kauffman Fellow is an institute for teaching venture capitalists how to be better. And their focus is the entrepreneur. So as you heard a lot of the LPs mention, the entrepreneurs are key to the success of any good venture capitalist. And it teaches the venture capitalist really how to better understand and have a more amicable relationship with the entrepreneur. And that just fits really well with BDC and what we do. I mean, we're the entrepreneur bank and the only bank for entrepreneurs. So there seems to be a lot of alignment in terms of philosophy and how we should, relatively easily align in our vision of what to do for the VC industry. And what Kauffman does, and the reason I want to share this with you is to sort of give you some context on who they are and what they bring to the industry as world-leading educators for venture capitalists, and how we were able to extract some of that and map it into the Canadian landscape to help our Canadian GPs. So Pankaj is here, and correct me if I say anything wrong or misrepresent Kauffman in any way. I don't think I see any other fellows in the room, but certainly if you are, raise your hand. So Kauffman really starts out by creating a trusted and intense network of relationships. And they do that by creating an environment of confidence and a validation and vetting of the people that you're interacting with, so that you can speak freely, openly, and candidly about your experiences. And as a consequence, there is extensive peer-to-peer learning, and that helps you as an individual really accelerate your learning beyond your own experience. And we felt that that was really something that we needed here in Canada, because we don't see as many deals compared to some of our US counterparts. We don't have as many opportunities to transact. We don't see as many exits. And yet we need to learn. We need to accelerate that learning. So by sharing with 10 active GPs in Canada, all of a sudden you've now expanded your experience, if it's real and meaningful. So this was really one of the key things that we wanted to do. And we did that with them by consulting with them and pulling out the key elements. And one of it was, one of the important elements was providing access to best practices and having industry leaders come in and speak with the cohort, having the cohort go through the program together as a cohort. We had a lot of discussion about whether or not we have these one-off and multiple events, or to really mimic the Kauffman experience by having a cohort go through the process together. And we finally landed on that and have designed the program as a 4-module, 3-day, each module event over a course of 18 months, so essentially one every 6 months. And I'm going to ask 3 of the cohort members to join me in just a moment to talk about their experience. And the reason we wanted to share this with you today is because we got you here captive. We knew you'd come to hear the LPs, and we thought we'd throw this in as well. We are at the encouragement of this current class, we are planning a second cohort. And we felt that we should have an opportunity to share this experience with you so that you can have give it some thought and see if it's something that makes sense for you or for your fund. So perhaps I can ask Janet, Jean-François, and Code to come up and join me and talk about their experience. Now, we understand that this is standing between you and cocktail. So we'll be efficient, because that's what we've learned to do, right? Be efficient and be effective at the same time. And essentially, once we decided, I have to say, these three folks and their seven other participants of the cohort have been fully engaged, fully committed to participating in this program. I think there's a recognition that what you put in is what you're going to get out. And we at BDC have been really honored to watch the journey as they've gone through it with a full commitment. You know, cell phones down, laptops closed for 3 days. It's not easy when you're an active investor, but we try to put in, you know, appropriate break times for you to check your email. So hopefully we've got that right. So anyway, without further ado, I'm gonna ask my my colleagues here to talk a little bit, take a few minutes to talk about their experience and any highlights that you might want to share with this audience. Code? Sure.
Maybe let me start by turning on the microphone. I'm giving a shout out to BDC. It occurred to me while I was sitting in the audience that I may have had a relationship with BDC longer than most anybody in this room. Interestingly, BDC backed my first startup almost 30 years ago, and I am that old. And then 2 after that. So I had my first 3 companies BDC backed when I was still a teenager. And then, no, I did. I paid it all back with interest. And so they taught me how to be an entrepreneur effectively at that age. And then I finished my degree. I moved to the U.S. and I became a VC about 18 years ago, and I spent most of that time in the U.S. But I moved back to Canada 6 years ago, sort of riffing on Jacques' comment. It was very important to me that as a Canadian who'd lived abroad, that we didn't grow up an entire generation of kids serving other kids coffee, and that innovation and technology was an important part of that formula for success. So I've seen the VC school on the US side, and now I've seen it with GP Academy on the Canadian side. My high-level sort of takeaway comment would be that venture capital is a shared risk experience among GPs, and the only way to share that risk is to build a level of trust. You build it with your LPs, of course, but you also build it with other GPs. And in my experience, it takes a long time to build a relationship with GPs, and it's born from sitting on boards together and seeing each other at cocktail events and so on. But what GP Academy has afforded us is the ability to spend really intensive time with 9 rising stars and me. We've spent over 100 hours together in really intense sessions, debating and listening and getting lectured to and lecturing. And the outcome of that is a very tight-knit group that I think will go forward for the next entire generation, and I'm super grateful for that.
Good. Just for a bit of context, as a firm, YStar, 4 years ago, we decided to sponsor and pay for the Kaufman Fellowship of one of our colleagues, Lylan Masterman, that many of you know. And so we've witnessed the impact of the Kaufman Fellowship on Lylan and the quality of the relationship that he's built with the cohort members. And we were kind of blown away by that. We also noticed the kind of the best practices that he's learned through Kaufman. And we're also impressed. So coming in the GP Academy, my expectations were pretty high about the program. And I mean, the key takeaway is essentially most of us, excluding Code and a few parties in the audience, have been GPs for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Whereas in the Valley, as you know, there's several decades of experience of managing GPs as businesses. So for us, just grabbing best practices from those top firms, when it comes to managing our own businesses, at the end of the day, as GPs, we're managing businesses. So whether it's about building our teams, how to scale our teams, how to compensate and incentivize our teams, how to run our investment process, deal sourcing, who votes. So there's a lot of discussions like that we basically had as a group of Canadian GPs that were super interesting, but also we had the luxury of hearing from funds like Emergence Capital on their journey throughout several funds. Upfront Ventures, the COO, Chief Operating Officer of Upfront, basically telling us how we built the platform approach at Upfront, how we build the back office, the front office, all the supporting groups for entrepreneurs. And those little things are great because they're basically inspiring us in managing our own businesses, being GPs.
Great. So I have just felt so fortunate to be part of the GP Academy. I have learned so much, as I think all of us have, and built amazing relationships. And I think one thing, when you think about venture capital as a profession, I think this type of academy is particularly relevant for venture capitalists, more so than a lot of other professions. And I think there's three key reasons for that. First of all is that, as in any field, we can't really afford to learn at our own rate of learning, right? We need to figure out how can we learn, how can we grow faster than our own learning curve. And I think in VC, it's particularly important that we do that because, one, the learning curve is very long, because often it takes years before you see the impact of some of your decisions. And secondly, because there are so many different variables in each situation in which we invest, in each company that we work with, that it takes a lot of different experiences before you really start to recognize and see the same patterns emerging. So because of that, the long learning curve, we're really, hey, there's huge opportunity or almost a need to accelerate your learning by learning from others. And I think the other thing that's unique about the venture capital industry is almost all GPs at a firm have not been a GP at another firm. And so without this type of exposure to other firms, you really don't know how do other firms do it. And to be able to sit with a group of colleagues and say, hey, how do you guys run investment meetings? And how do you guys, as JF mentioned, how do you do the voting? And what do you have your analysts do? And what works and what doesn't work? Yet that has been extremely valuable. And then I think the third thing as well is just thinking about in Canada, where we do not have the same maturity, generally speaking, in terms of our funds, to have people come in who can say, you know what, I have worked at this fund for 20 years, and here's how we have evolved, that really helps us think about the next 10 or 15 or 20 years of our fund, and how should we be thinking about succession planning and those sorts of things. So it's just been an extremely valuable, rewarding experience. So I really want to have a call out to BDC, and particularly to Neil and Ela, who really made it happen.
So why do you think you needed GP Academy? I'm just picking up on the thread that you both mentioned about the value of speaking openly and candidly with your peers in the industry. I mean, we see the same faces at the same cocktails, all the time. So what is it about GP Academy that made the difference?
I think, to me, it's the time away, right? The whole, you've got 3 days and you don't have your phone, you don't have your computers during the sessions. And so, I mean, it's one thing to see somebody at a cocktail party and say, oh, how do you guys do that? Oh, okay, that's interesting. Then you go back and you're running 1,000,000 miles an hour, doing a bunch of things. But I think having the time to sit back and really think and then reflect, okay, that's really interesting. Now, how should we be incorporating that learning into our firm? And how does that work? It's also that just remove yourself from the weeds of every day and think about it.
Outside of a deal flow context, obviously, we all co-invest, see each other on boards, but it's always, in a rush in some ways. So just to remove the deal dynamics and from the equation, and having like very open and honest and transparent discussion about stuff is quite refreshing. We don't do that enough, for sure.
So, Code, can you point to anything specific that you could say happened to you in your career on a deal or a transaction or in some context that is directly related to your involvement, participation with GP Academy, or is the jury still out?
I'll give you an example of something we did just recently. In fact, it was just last week. So I had the privilege of helping to lead a road trip called the Canadian VC Road Trip. We went to New York, and 9 of us went. Unfortunately, Janet didn't make it. We were sad. But 9 of us went to New York City for 2 days, and we lined up meetings. I think we had 17 GPs that we met with from New York. We had a dinner that was sponsored by Silicon Valley Bank, and it was amazing restaurant, private room, and we had, I think there was 20 of us in the room, 22 of us in the room, networking and interacting with our VCs in New York City. And then we spent a half a day the next day doing a round table with another bunch of VCs in New York and swapping deals. I think we swapped 17 or 18 deals with them after having had drinks and dinner the night before. And it was just a very deep conversation, and mostly because the 10 of us were riffing off of each other, and it was almost like we were one team. And so I will take that up a notch and say that, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion in Canada, but I think it's been one of our superpowers for a long time. And I say that because, a lot of people talk about Silicon Valley as being sort of the gold standard of venture capital, and you've got to emulate that. And I would disagree. I think we have to find our own model. And so if you think about what we're good at, collaboration and teamwork is one of them. Canadians are nice, and sometimes we're rift about it, but if we I'm not going to say band together necessarily, but if we lean on each other and leverage each other, that could be our superpower on how we differentiate on a world stage. It's very powerful. And so GP Academy has given us that, and certainly our relationship transcended the school on a trip, and we'll do another one early next year to another city where we show up with 10 Canadian VCs. And I can tell you, it's hard to get 15 VCs in a city to come visit you if you're by yourself. But if you bring 9 others with you, boy, those emails were a lot easier to make and be receptive to.
You missed a good trip, it sounds like.
Should we on the next one?
Yes.
You'll have to organize the next one.
Absolutely. I'll take it on.
And Janet, what would you be able to point to anything that you could say this has helped, or this has catalyzed, GP Academy has helped catalyze this transaction? Or
yeah, so
or this
one particular example in terms of a transaction was a company based in Toronto. We led the seed round. They were doing their Series A, and we were filling out the round, and they had one lead for the Series A, but then they were looking for another large investor to fill out the round. And so because of the GP Academy, I knew, we all knew each other very well, and I called one particular GP who I thought would be particularly interested in this company. And I think because we had that shared trust, they very quickly went through the diligence and agreed to write a significant stake into the Series A deal. So I think that was a combination of me knowing all of the other players, in this case knowing him, what he was looking for, what stage, what type of company, and then I think him trusting our judgment in terms of, okay, well, if Real has led it, if they say this, if they're going to do their pro rata in the Series A, it made him feel very comfortable about writing a large check into that.
And JF, one of your colleagues, one of your partners now, Lylan, was recently made partner. With his Kaufman experience and your GP Academy experience, can you speak to maybe your own personal feelings about participating in these kinds of education programs? Would you consider participating in Kaufman now? Because to be clear, GP Academy is a collaboration with the Kaufman Fellows. You're not a Kaufman Fellow, and we need to be very clear. It's a BDC-run program where we've benefited tremendously by their support and assistance. But what about going for the gusto now, that $80,000 7-module international summit 2-year commitment? Is that something that you consider?
I would certainly strongly recommend it. I'd say in particular in the case of Lylan is as a product and technical background. So if you come from more of an operating entrepreneur background and you want to thrive in VC, I think it's even more powerful than if you have a a different type of background. So I would. There's no doubt I would strongly recommend it. We're actually looking at enrolling 1 or 2 per year of our own employees in the program. I mean, there's a lot of travel required. It's a big time commitment beyond the dollars. So of course you have to prioritize what you want.
So GP Academy could offer perhaps an interim.
It's definitely a good glimpse of
Step.
the benefits of Kaufman, and I mean, understanding it's more limited in terms of time. And
So what would you say to people who might be considering, participation in either GP Academy or perhaps even Kaufman Fellows?
I would say that anybody considering this should be talking to Kaufman Fellows or folks like us, and we will be very transparent about the plus and minuses of the program. But at the end of the day, I mean, I only see benefits to being part of something like GP Academy, and again, it's just a question of the kind of relationship we've built are impossible to build outside, I mean, the normal course of business. Like
Code?
I mean, I'd do it hands down without question. I mean, when I lived in California, I applied actually and was declined because I'd been a VC for too long. Ironically, there was this period of time when they were only doing principals and less than 3 years of experience. 2 big things that come out of it. One is you just become a better VC because you're sharing best practices not only with your cohort, but the speakers are top notch, right? So you have tier 1 VCs spending half a day with you, answering every question off the record, behind closed doors. And that level of transparency is amazing. In addition to that, we had entrepreneurs bearing their soul and throwing things, and that was a good learning. And then we had academics talking about sort of the numbers part of it. And so all that adds up to making you a better VC. And if we're not reinventing ourselves and thinking about how we can do our business better on a regular basis, then we become dinosaurs. And this is, we don't want to have happen. But secondly, honestly, just the network. You get that network and you'll take it for life. And it's really hard to create it. And this is a forcing function that not to be missed.
So folks can reach out to you.
Sure, I'll talk
All
about
right,
that.
great. I'm mindful of the time, but before we go, maybe I can ask Janet a last question. We've got LPs in the room.
Yes.
And some who were up here on stage and some others who are hiding behind chairs. What would you say to the LPs in the room about the support that, as a GP, you would need from them to be able to freely engage in this kind of program? I mean, it is a commitment of time, capital, effort, and your focus of attention. Is it an investment that's worthwhile?
Absolutely. So I think, first of all, one thing that we haven't mentioned in terms of the things that we learned, we talked about the bonds, we talked about learning about from different VCs and from different entrepreneurs. The third pillar that we learned a lot about was from LPs. And that was extremely valuable to get insights from LPs about what they're looking for and how they view GPs, so that was very helpful. But to answer your question, absolutely. I think that every single one of us would say the experience has been very, very valuable in terms of making us and making our entire firms more effective. So just the way that we look at, hey, we want our entrepreneurs to get the right training, the right coaching so that they'll be successful, I would think that the LPs would think, hey, this is a great opportunity to increase the performance level of their GPs. And at the same time, the time commitment really isn't that much. It's like 3 days, 3 days.
Every 6 months.
Yeah, every 6 months, yeah. So it's very manageable.